Hannah. Can you hear me clearly? I want to test again. Thank you very much. Okay, I'll do full screen. Can you see my PowerPoint?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Good morning, good evening, and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for your participation today. My name's Jenny Li. I'm assistant professor in the Department of Chinese Language Studies at Education University Hong Kong. So it's a great pleasure for me to chair this event. And today's event is organized by our newly established Multilingual University Network for the Society for Research into Higher Education, which is also called SRHE. And we also have the support from 2 academic units at Hong Kong U today, because this is our first hybrid event. So we're supported by the academic unit for language and literacy education, and also the comparative education research center. So I'll give you a brief introduction of our network. I promise it won't take long. So our network was established last year in July to serve as a platform for new developments, new research topics, or interdisciplinary research topics about multilingualism and higher education research. And we have 4 co-conveners. So we have Dr. Ibra Prat, who is a senior lecturer at Queen's University Belfast, and Dr. Sal Consoli, who is an assistant professor at the University of Edinburgh, and Dr. Dylan Williams, who is lecturer at Queen Mary University of London, and also including me. I'm the only convener based in Hong Kong. So a little bit advertisement of our upcoming event. Our next event will be held online on March 14th, and the topic's about bridging linguistic and epistemological divides in higher education. It's a very important topic, and we have 3 speakers who are experts in multilingualism and intercultural education. So please stay tuned with our next event, and you can find all the relevant information on our websites. Okay, so today's event is focused on generative AI and the work of knowledge production in the Multilingual University. So we created this topic because we feel we're currently in the flood of AI, and it has tremendously transformed the way we see our research and the way we are doing research and the way we are creating knowledge. So as higher education researchers, we often grapple with the markers of our worth and also the value we could bring to our own research fields. And very often we cannot help asking questions like, what does it mean to contribute meaningfully in the era of AI? Are we merely facilitators of information, or do we still retain the essence of our original thought as researchers? I think it's great that today we have 3 experts who are specialized in different areas in AI and higher education, so we can bring this dialogue together and maybe explore solutions and foster meaningful dialogues about how AI influences our knowledge production and research process in the multilingual research community. So the first speaker, Professor Mingming Chu, who is a chair professor at the Education University of Hong Kong. I've been very fortunate to be his colleague, not only because he's a super genius researcher, super productive, but also because he's so generous in helping many young researchers from different disciplines in advancing their research ideas. So Professor Mingming Chu is going to give us a talk on, does AI bias threaten knowledge, global knowledge production? This is a very important topic. I'm sure we could hear some very nuanced perspectives from his role as a computer scientist and also quantitative researcher. And our second speaker today is Professor Liz Jackson, who is a professor and assistant dean of research at Hong Kong U's Faculty of Education. And Professor Liz Jackson has published broadly in the fields of philosophy of education, global studies in education, and citizenship education. And she has also conducted research in North America, Africa, and Asia. Her topic today is the voice of the robot, conformity, and language in the era of AI. We're really looking forward to this very interesting topic. And our last speaker today, Professor Benjamin Luke Morehouse, who is associate professor in the Department of English at City University of Hong Kong. He has a lot of experience as a teacher educator and also English language teacher in Hong Kong primary schools. So his topic today is how can multilingual researchers maintain integrity within the great AI flood. This is very, very important, especially for higher education researchers. So we're really looking forward to the three provocations given by the three speakers today. So I think I should give the floor to our first speaker, Professor Mingming Chu. Just additional note, because all the voices here in this room can be projected, so it's great that you can keep quiet during the speaker's presentations. Thank you for your cooperation. Sorry.
So thank you for inviting me to talk about whether AI bias threatens global knowledge production. So I'm going to start with an introduction of artificial intelligence. A simple way of thinking about this is AI uses historical data to answer questions. So first, we add lots and lots of data to train the machine. Then using this data, it tries to make predictions or answer questions. That's a simple way of thinking about it. So a little more sophisticated way of understanding it is in terms of filters. So let's say we have like a question, is this a cat or a dog? This is our input. We feed it into the AI, which consists of information filters. And let's try and figure out what is the difference between cat and dog. And then it gives an answer. This is a cat. This, of course, is wrong. So when it gets the wrong answer, it takes that wrong answer and feeds it back in the system to change the filters. So it'll try to get a correct answer. So that's like a simple way of thinking about how AI works. So another confusion is what's the difference between AI, machine learning, and deep learning? So the biggest category is artificial intelligence. That's where machines are trying to mimic human behaviors. A subset of that is machine learning, where the machines are actually making decisions. They're not doing things simply based on what the programmer said. And within that, we have deep learning, which is a subset of machine learning. And this is where we have neural networks and large language models that solve problems. For example, ChatGPT will fall in this category. So let's look at large language models. Basically, a large language model predicts the next word. So as input, I'm trying to write something, and my input so far is I'm having a hard time figuring out what to do next. Do you think what should be the next word? So again, we have information filter, feed this in. And thinks the next word should be should based on past data. So we take that word, we put it into our writing so far. Now I'm having a hard time figuring out what to do next. Do you think I should, what's the next word? So it keeps on doing this. This is how it generates text. So if you think about AI capabilities, there are two major types. One is it tries to mimic what humans do. So for example, robotics, you might have seen there are now robots that can make like cappuccinos. They basically take the same human motion and try to copy it in a way to do what humans do. So this is the purpose of automation. We're trying to make things faster, cheaper, more consistently. So we're trying to mimic human ability. A separate perspective is we're trying to improve human ability. We're trying to do things that humans currently cannot do. So we're trying to make better decisions, for instance. Just a quick comment on the second image in the middle. Here you see, you can probably look closely, you see some of those are dogs and some of those are blueberry muffins. So it's a classic problem of like, which is which? And it's actually not that easy to tell if just glancing at it. So artificial intelligence has grown really quickly. It's moved all around the world, doing lots of things out. So translation is one of the first uses of it. So if you use Google Translate like 10 years ago, it was pretty horrible. Like sometimes you get words right, but often meaning would just get lost. It couldn't do metaphors, it couldn't do events, it couldn't do perspectives. It's not right. But once it added AI, it became amazingly good. Basically, it became super reliable. You could take Google Translate and go anywhere in the world and talk to people, and you're probably going to have a reasonable conversation. It also recognizes faces. Of course, in China, they've done this really well. Facebook is also doing this. Something that may not be as well known is that it can predict terrorism now. So you take all this data, like the CIA, bring all this stuff together, and in any given country, it tries to predict, is there going to be a terrorist event today and where? And Raven Sentry, which does this, is they report they're 70% successful in terms of predicting whether this is going to happen or not. So 30% is still a huge error rate, but still a lot better than just asking people to guess. And this is much better than humans. So I think humans, they're around 60%. So they're 70%, but you put them together, you get 80% accuracy. So this also tells you about how to use AI. It's not simply just using AI. It doesn't do exactly what humans do, which is good, because then you can bring them together and be more successful. Of course, there are personal assistants. Siri, Alexa, ChatGPT, these are things you're probably aware of. But there are problems with AI. It's not a perfect world. And I'm going to go through some of the problems today, especially bias. Also, control issues. Reliability. Is it understandable? Is it secure? Is it predictable? So bias is basically asking, does AI distort reality? Control, can you control it? Is it going to do what you want it to do? Is it reliable? Can you count on it to do important tasks? Does it make sense? If you get results, can other people say, yeah, okay, I can see that's going on? If you're in an adversarial situation, like if you're a company or your country in a war, can outsiders invade your AI? So for instance, in the Ukraine-Russian war, they have they're trying to develop AI for their drones. You want to know that that drone is going to attack the enemy and not you. Like if someone hacks that drone's AI, you're in big trouble. Is it predictable? Is it acting the way you expect it to act? Also, if you're taking photos, I'm going to share slides afterwards. So you don't have to stress out about, can I get the photo in time? Let's talk about bias. There's several types of bias. One is the history or training data that's being used, the labeling of what that data means, the use of proxies when you don't have the information. I'm going to talk about countermeasures for this bias. Let's start history and training data. So when you give AI data, it assumes that's all true. That's what it is. And also, if it's not there, it doesn't exist. Normal, assumptions, but can be problematic. And so if your training data has anything wrong with it, anything that's false, or even a slight distortion, this is a potential problem, because that's the universe AI is living in. And so the AI is going to interpret new things based on what it knows. So if it's trained on cats and dogs, it's going to say, this is a dog. It kind of looks like a Chihuahua. It's definitely not a cat. So we're going to go with dog. So it extrapolates from the training data, and hence this is a dog. And so there's also a problem with omission. So you have things that are wrong, but you also have things that are not there. And so most training data is going to have more from majority of people than minority of people in the country. In terms of language, it's dominated by English all around the world. Even the airplane pilots, they have to learn English in order to be a pilot. There's a lot more English in Mandarin Chinese, a lot more Chinese than Hindi, Spanish, Arabic, so on. It's also going to be dominated political elite. They generate the most stuff. They're probably going to use it. They're going to pick what's useful to them, as opposed to people who are underprivileged. A lot of it's still, unfortunately, dominated by men. as opposed to women, as opposed to transgender people. Rich rather than poor, of course. And also like people more educated, more university student stuff than high school students, primary school graduates. And also more by older than younger. So even though you hear a lot about young people on Twitter or social media, most of the stuff out there is still done by older people. They've just had more time. Also, what's false or something that might not be false but unjust? So there are a lot of human beliefs that are wrong, and then because they have these beliefs, you're going to get unjust results. For instance, a very common belief all around the world is that dark-skinned people are inferior. And as a consequence of that, all around the world, they're jailed more often in almost every single country. So your training data has this, it's going to replicate this. It's going to like, well, this is what happens in the past, when that's the truth, or I can use that as truth. It's going to incorporate that and then give you appropriate output, or inappropriate output in this case. It's going to give you these false beliefs and unjust results. And so for people who don't know this, they're going to learn this. If like you're a student, AI tells you this stuff, you're probably going to learn that. And then if people already believe it, it's going to reinforce it. So it's harmful in these two ways. There's also a labeling problem. How do you assess your information? So you get both human and AI labeling of training data, and this can poison your data set. For instance, if for some reason, somehow this got into the database, there's a cat, well, it's going to stay there. So even if 99% of all your labels are right, you can have a wrong label. And in a way, this is actually much worse than like most of your data is wrong because it's harder to tell. And so it's going to hide on mostly correct labels. People try it out. If they don't find it, they're like, system's great, reliable, everything seems to be fine. But then, in very obscure circumstances, it might pop up. And so if you're like in a low stake situation, like if someone's like learning new stuff, that might be okay. But if, let's say you're creating a product they can sell all around the world, or you're in a war, you don't want this mistake to suddenly pop up when you're fighting soldiers. And so there's also a cascade effect. So what happens when AI activates the wrong label? Before you thought it's perfectly fine. It's been working like for years, but suddenly you get this odd result. So you realize your reliable AI is actually not reliable. And then so if you get a result, let's say like you're dealing with like choosing pets, and all of a sudden it recommends that you have a blueberry muffin as your pet. You're like, what? It often doesn't make sense. So then you're like, okay, it's not predictable anymore. This is not reliable. And if you're in a high security situation, let's say you're for a company or an army, you might worry there's a security breach. Has someone gone to your system and like really messed up your AI? And also now you wonder about how much control you have over the system. If there's a glitch somewhere, it could be a glitch anywhere. So the bias can cause cascading problems. And so there's a further problem of AI might use label data to create more data. So most time, machine learning requires millions of billions of data to get to reliable levels of accuracy. And we usually don't have that much data most of the time. Cats and dogs, we have lots of photos, cats, dogs, but almost nothing else do we have that much data. So for example, here's an important question. What is the 3D structure of a protein? So Google's AlphaFold used training data to create more data. They took scientists, I think they had like 100 or so fully defined proteins. They had ideas for maybe a few hundred more. And so they took this and they used this to create more data. And then when they created new structures for proteins, a few scientists, they create like a few hundred of them. Scientists pick like maybe 10 of them and then see if they actually correct or not. And so they tried this a few times. It seems to be okay. So then they're like, oh, okay, we have 100 data, we create hundreds of more data. You multiply now, you have thousands and millions of data points. And then you keep on repeating this process. So then you have billions of potential structures. And so when they tried out, hey, it works. 200 million protein three-dimensional structures, Nobel Prize. They won a Nobel Prize for this in a matter of I think 5 years, which is amazingly fast for a Nobel Prize. So this shows you AI can help you win a Nobel Prize. So for you out there thinking about whether to use AI, there's a huge benefit to using AI. You can win a Nobel Prize. But there are problems with it. Let's say you have something that's labeled wrong in the data set. So in the AlphaFold case of three proteins, the scientists were really, really careful. They checked everything. Apparently, there's nothing wrong with the data set they didn't catch. But let's say you miss something. You have hundreds of cases, you might miss one. Now, if you're using a data set to create more data, you can multiply your error. And so what can happen is that if those data points are important enough, they're going to be recalled and used a lot, your wrong data, even start as 1%, that part might be multiplying so that your incorrect labels can then be either substantial as cause problems or even overwhelm the originally correct data. So you could get to a point where your database actually is mostly wrong. It might have been 99% correct before, but now it's 60% wrong. So then your output's wrong. And this is what they mean when there's they say there's an AI model collapse. Basically, your model is useless. The issue is fine, but the process has caused it to be totally useless now. So Nobel Prize, AI model collapse. These are possible choices. There's also a problem, proxy bias. So you could have a situation where your input or output are not so clear. They're not really precise definitions. So cat or dog is pretty easy. But let's say you want to know if something is true or fake news. This is a much harder problem. There's no simple way of doing this. So we don't know exactly how to do this. Let's use proxies. There are people who do this pretty well. New York Times, BBC, they're pretty good at this. Let's just say they're always true. Whatever's in there is always true. So you can see right away, that's not always true. Newspapers make mistakes. If you look at any good newspaper, they'll print corrections pretty much every single day. There are things they get wrong, they try to correct it. But then you have wrongly labeled data. And maybe it's not a lot, but you still have some. And you could have the same problems before. You could have the cascading effects where someone spits out something that's crazy. People feel it's unreliable, becomes incomprehensible, unpredictable. If it's an adversarial situation, potential security breach, and uncontrollability. So that was a lot to throw at you. Does anyone have questions about what I said before I go into countermeasures? Okay, I'll move on. So what can you do to reduce bias? One is diversity. Second is transparency. Third is validation. And fourth is education. So how can we reduce bias by diversity? Well, part of the problem is that the data source is not that good. And so if you have one data source from one person, there's probably a lot of things get wrong. But if you have lots of data sources from lots of different people, hopefully they can detect errors in other people's ideas. So if you have diverse data sources, you're more likely to identify contradictions and problems and address them. You also want to have broad data coverage, not just depth. So most of the time we're concerned about depth. We want to understand one thing really well, but breadth allows you to see possible issues that you're not thinking about. So try to have as much broad data coverage as possible. Hire people who are different. Hire diverse AI designers and programmers. Different experiences, different ethnicities, races, histories, cultures, different ways of looking at things. And so you want to recruit people, exploit diverse ones, and to have those people, you need to get them to a schooling pipeline. So you can't just wait until you're looking for people when they're applying for jobs. You have to start early. If you don't train people, there won't be those people out there. So in the school system, you want to bring people in, have them learn AI. Not everyone, but a large chunk of them. Transparency is also critical. Everyone has to use training data. Let people see what training data looks like. Help people see what's going on. To understand and also spot potential problems. Reveal data sources, including where it comes from. So you have a data set, who created it? what potential flaws were there in the process of making it? Who did the work? Credit the designers and programmers. So you know, based on what people did, if there's like something they did wrong in one place, you want to check everything else they've done. Have they done something similar? Just like with detectives, if they plant false evidence, they check all their cases, see if they've done it before. And also report uses and outcomes. So people are using it, see how they're using it. Was it effective? Was it not effective? The more information is available, the easier it is for you to decide whether it's suitable for you. The problems that come up, can you tolerate those? Also validation. So if you're a good AI organization, you should be validating all your work. This doesn't always happen, but it's really good practice. Specifically the software and their outcomes. Then you check the software's okay, they're getting outcomes they want. So you want to do it using computer programs. So you write programs to basically check your computer programs. And also you need to have humans look into this at different stages. Once you have transparent data and outcomes, lots of people can validate. It's not only people inside the company. Your customers can validate it. They can see what happened and see if it's what they wanted. And ultimately, you can have crowdsourcing. You have lots of people looking at this, you're more likely to spot a problem. Lastly, we have education. Include AI in standard curriculum, primary, secondary university. So Hong Kong's really good at this. They're still developing this at Education University. What's his name? SC. I forgot his name. Sorry. Anyway, SC is a professor at Education University. He's developing curriculum for primary, secondary university. You want to recruit more people, especially diverse people in the schooling pipeline to AI. That's at all levels, from primary school, middle school, university, and graduate school, of course. And you want to share information about AI. What are the strengths of it? What are the weaknesses? What are good uses of it? What are bad uses of it? By websites, videos. For researchers, of course, we're all going to want to do this, but also for general public. So that if you're going to have public policy and people are going to give input, you want people to have an idea of like what's it about and what are good rules that government should create for AI use. So let me just leave it at that. Thank you very much.
Hey, so thank you very much for coming. Thank you to the Multilingual University Network for organizing this event, and to Jenny and Rihanna. And thanks all of you for coming on Friday night at the beginning of the term in January. Thank you for coming to our session. So it was mentioned in my biography, I have a slightly different background. I think this is a really well-organized event because we have different disciplinary backgrounds, all three of us. And my background is more philosophy of education. So you're going to say that actually there's some very common themes and threads from the previous presentation, but I will discuss them a little differently because I'm most interested in the ethical dimensions of these challenges. And so what I find in Hong Kong, and reflecting on new colleagues who've joined us recently, is there's a lot of discussion about how useful AI is, how wonderful it is, how you better learn it. You better get with the program. If you don't get with the program, you're going to be in trouble. And as a philosopher, there's kind of a sense that you're like a stick in the mud. And I feel like I must be like 1,000 years old or have my head in the sand. Because I think it's worth reflecting on AI also having costs, right? So it has its strengths and weaknesses, which have been really well explained from a technological view. But every time we do something different, we have a cost associated with that as well. So just to reflect on some of the costs. So everything wonderful comes with a cost. So you get to learn all these things tonight. You're not at a wonderful restaurant in Hong Kong on Friday night. I am worried that if we don't talk about the costs and the benefits, that there's a risk of it becoming a self-fulfilling prophecy. So if the president of my university says to me, it's all about AI, and then I say, okay, I agree with you, then that becomes the truth, right? If there's no other perspectives out there. I think it's important to question the interests undergirding some of these statements. So AI is something that people are benefiting from financially, and some of these things are being sold. So in the context of things being sold, we need to question who's saying what and for what reason. I did some reflection on the history of fads for this presentation. And one thing I worry about is the sustainability of AI. If all of us become experts on AI, what are we not becoming an expert on, right? Because we only have so much time to develop ourselves as researchers. So maybe one of the people in this room will get a Nobel Prize after working on AI, but the other people might be better off focusing on something different, right? And I also worry about a pressure to conform and this idea that you're going to get left behind. My experience is that it's not making writing better in my classes. It's not making writing better in my field. So I'll share a little bit about that. And I think the next presentation will also share another perspective on this issue. I'm not going to go too much into it, but it's also recognizing, I think there's this sense that technology is very magical. It also is part of the real world and has real world costs. So again, just a critical reflection on those real world costs. I had this problem during the pandemic with the use of codes on the menus. Rather than to have a menu at a restaurant, you have to scan it. And this is idea, oh, you don't need a paper menu, but you do need a phone, you do need the data. So there is a cost there. It's not just something magical that's free. There's also a cost associated with it. All of this comes from some United Nations reports about the costs of AI. So I think it's worth thinking about, does it cost something to use AI? So it costs, we pay if we're paying for a service, but also the environments, our environments also can pay. So that's something to also consider. But what I really want to focus on here is costs from a more philosophical sense when it comes to style and voice and perspective in AI. So I want to focus in the rest of my comments on the issue of voice. I actually had one of my very close colleagues yesterday tell me he had put his work into AI and ChatGPT. It made it much better. I said, what do you mean by better? Okay, so sometimes things are made better. Sometimes they're made different, and different is not always better. So I want to explore some of these gray areas about what's better. So we know that, Microsoft Word has been correcting grammar for some time. We know that there's certain things that AI technologies are very good at doing in terms of word processing, but what else is happening at the same time that might have a hidden cost to it? So I want to think a little bit about voice, and I have some examples here. So maybe if you are a student and getting involved with university, you've been encouraged to learn how to send emails in a professional way. And so there's different ways to be professional. One of the things that we're often told, be concise, be to the point, and be confident, right? So you want to show that you're confident. And I have mixed feelings about this, as I'm going to say. So some of this I think is good advice. So instead of saying sorry for the delay, you can say thanks for your patience. And these things mean different things, but it might sound better in your head to say that. Instead of saying, oh, sorry, I missed that, you can say, nice catch, thanks for noticing that. So different ways to flip the script. I started noticing this when I was writing emails, that when you're in the Microsoft editor, it actually edits your emails in this way. So if I say, sorry, I just wondered, and if you click on that just, it will say, you don't need to have the word just there. It sounds stronger without the word just. I think, actually, I tell all of my students, you should never put I think in your writing, because I know you think it because you wrote it, like that's obvious. But I have some mixed feelings about it in an email, but in any case, you could say this is simply redundant, don't need it, don't need the actually. So these are some examples of things we're encouraged to focus on. So what is the problem with this? I asked the Microsoft editor. The Microsoft editor, by the way, says that you should definitely buy more Microsoft products when you're learning about it. So just to highlight that. So I think it's actually, these are considered filler words. So they say that technically is a filler word. It says, in the previous sentence, removing the word technically doesn't change the sentence. So technically is technically a filler word. But why do they say technically is technically a filler word? That's a question that I have. This is more from the same exact websites. So what do? You edit. When in doubt, leave it out. And definitely use Microsoft Editor. Again, so this isn't like neutral, right? This is Microsoft telling you to use Microsoft. And it explains that filler words don't offer very much in the way of content. The more formal a moment, the less appropriate filler words are. So this, to me, is very interesting. I think all of these words mean things. As a philosopher, I would encourage us all to think about saying what we mean and meaning what we say. I think that saying I'm sorry means something. I think the just means something. I think all of these things mean something. Technically is technically a filler word. I think when they say technically is technically, it means something. That's what I think. What do you think? But I'll be interested to hear. And so while Microsoft Editor will say that filler words are meaningless and you just delete them from your work, that's not the whole story. According to many linguists, it conveys substantial meaning. It displays different kinds of dispositions and interpersonal relations. It shows that you're being qualified, relatable, casual, weak, friendly. It's associated with femininity, and this is why it's considered like Valley Girl talk, which is the worst thing in the world because girls and women do it. It shows nuance and context. It kind of gives you a sense of who a person is and their personality. It can soften disagreement, it can add richness, and it can convey sensitivity and delicacy. So it's just one side of things to say that filler words don't mean anything. I was playing with this online website, and it told me, I said, I wonder if AI is really useful. It says to take out the word really. I wonder if AI is useful. Those mean different things. If I say, I wonder if AI is really useful, I'm referencing a context of it being useful or not, and the context that people assume it is useful. So there is a meaning there, I would suggest. As a philosopher, this is important to me when I'm making an argument. I found this in a paper I wrote, and then I put it in the editor, and it still suggested the same thing. It goes way too far. It is so obsessed with simplicity and being concise that it's changing meanings in very detrimental ways. So it says, if you say do not succeed, it says change it to fail. That's two different things. So if it says, it'd be like if I say, do you want to go to dinner? You say, I'm not starving, but I could have something. Microsoft will change it to, I'm full, right? So those are different words. Those mean different things. So there's no sense. It's sort of like this binary. I'm thinking of this off the cuff. It's like this binary, it's one or the other. But in real life, things are not one or the other in my experience. I think this is interesting when it comes to the things that Professor Chu is mentioning about diversity and voice and AI, because we know that certain groups of people will tend to use different kinds of language. So language is cultural and contextual. So I was thinking about these emails today, and I was thinking about emailing like a boss. So often I'll get requests from PhD students asking if I'll be their PhD supervisor, people who want to do their PhD. And they'll send me this email like a boss. I don't know if you received my last email. I just want to make sure you received it. I know you're busy, so did you get it? And I think, excuse me, I didn't know you were my boss, right? So that's one example. Our context matters. So when we say, I was just wondering, sorry to bother you, this isn't the meaning of the words. It has a different meaning in the relationship that's different from the words. So as a woman, I don't think I will email that much like a boss. I'm careful about when I want to email like a boss and when I won't want to email like a boss. Because I'm afraid that people will see me being very rough if I'm overly direct, right? So directness is one value, but it's not the only value. If you compare British English to American English, British English is more direct. Most Englishes are less direct than American English. So this prioritizes a sort of directness associated with American English, even in the case of the English language. And even we know English is very different than Chinese and other languages. So there's all sorts of different hierarchies we can break down here. So I would suggest that AI communicates in this direct, powerful way. One of the things I read on Microsoft Editor said that we want AI to use, we want to speak in a powerful way. Why do we want to speak in a powerful way? Should we always be powerful? Is being powerful always important to us? It's been trained on all of this information, but we know there are these biases in the information. So one of them that's been mentioned is men writing, authorities writing, experts writing, people with PhDs, journalists, thought leaders, politicians. These people really should be argumentative. Philosophers are very argumentative. Politicians are very direct. Those are virtues for those populations, but they're not communication virtues appropriate for every situation. So this is why there's this kind of manliness, this directness, this simplicity, is those are valued in certain circles, but that doesn't cover everyone in human existence. So my concern is that when we tell students that AI is going to help them with their writing, I'm concerned that we're also telling them that there's something wrong with the way they are and that they're supposed to sound more manly and direct and robotic. And what I found with my students' work is it often takes away meaning because the meaning is in the context and the context gets taken away. So in my student essays, I know when students are working with AI because the context disappears. I'll be talking to a student about an issue they're concerned about in their local community and the things they care about, and they know there's these challenges and these tensions. And all of a sudden at the end of the term, I get a paper and it's, since the dawn of mankind, we've known that testing is important in education. And the sentences don't really have any meaning. Each sentence sounds powerful as one sentence. It's direct and it's clear. But when I take all the sentences together, it doesn't mean anything. And that's because AI is not talking about human educational problems. It's not a person. People do different things from AI. And because it's trained on academic papers, it tends to take this view from nowhere, where things are observed, and it prefers generalities and generalizations. And probably Professor Chu can explain why this is and how this works related to what he was discussing, defers and appeals to the wisdom of the crowdsourced information. So it becomes very vague and general, and yet direct and powerful at the same time. But as a philosopher, I can say those are all the opposite of what I want. I want complexity, I want nuance, and I want social and cultural relevance. But I've gotten all of the opposite of that. It fails to say anything non-trivial or of consequence, but it sounds powerful. So I'm really worried the students are getting the wrong idea about how to use AI. My students want to address local challenges. Educators want to address challenges in the real world. AI doesn't know about educational challenges in your neighborhood. You're the person who knows about that. So AI can help you communicate about that, but it's not the expert on how to make a good argument about that because it doesn't know the things that matter to humans. So I'm out of time, but I'll just leave you with a few questions. Is communicating powerfully and concisely and directly more important than communicating caringly, cautiously, contextually, casually, carefully, or kindly? So to make the arguments I want to make, I actually usually want to be these other things rather than powerful or direct or simple. Because I'm interested in complicated academic ideas. I think these other things are more important. What are the implications for those who prefer to communicate in these ways? Are people thinking that something's wrong with them if they're caring or kind rather than powerful and direct? This is a hidden cost potentially. Does the world need more of the idea that there's a universal global view and personality and communication style, or should it have less of that? So thank you very much for your time, and I look forward to the discussion.
Thank you. I'll mirror everyone else and say thank you for the organizing the event. It's always great to have the opportunity to share our ideas and thinking and have such diversity of ideas and thinking as well, because it helps us to think more and to look at different angles from what we're looking at from. I'm going to try and address this question: how can multilingual researchers maintain integrity within this great AI flood? And when I put that into PowerPoint, it created this image. Which is AI generated image of a flood of some kind, right? So it's picking up words and creating images for me, which is saving me time, but also perhaps preventing me from thinking for myself and how I want to present myself as well, which is the challenge that these tools can provide us. Of course, there's a lot of potential of AI in knowledge production and dissemination. We can see that it can help contextualize and give us coherent instant translations. So as we know, academic publishing is dominated by the English language. If you don't have access to the English language, you don't have access to a vast amount of knowledge that's available. These tools make that translation process into different languages much more efficient and much more accurate than in previous ways, and obviously a lot cheaper than anything we had before. Of course, with the caveat related to bias, accuracy, and other things that come with that, but definitely makes things possible that were not possible before in that space. It allows for multiple modal representation and personalization of knowledge delivery. So in the past, we were fixated with the academic article as the way of disseminating knowledge, and it still was valued in our profession. And if we don't publish in academic articles, we don't get promotion, we don't get posts. But that doesn't mean that there's not other ways that our knowledge can be represented and how other people can access our information. So AI can provide ways of doing that. I asked GPT 4.0 to summarize a paper that I had and then turn it into a infographic. It generated the code for me and then created the infographic very quickly, something that I don't know how to code, but it can code for me and create that and give me that image. Give me that thing. I can then input that into a voice, into another AI, and it can create an audio version of that text. So if I can't see, or if I'm illiterate, I can still access that knowledge, right, through those modes. I may not be maybe interested, but I can, right? Equally, there's tools like Notebook LM that can turn academic articles into talk show formats and other kinds of formats and genres as well. So these are interesting ways of using these tools to access and engage with knowledge and disseminate knowledge, different from what we could have done before.
Below is the.
Oh, sorry, I won't share that. But you can have the PowerPoint later if you really want to hear it. Also, there's potential for automation of aspects of the research process and writing. So bringing these tools into our processes. And the reason I'm saying this is because with all the issues that they come with, they're already being utilized in these ways. So when people start using tools in certain ways, we need to start understanding what that means and how do we create a culture and system around that, so it becomes something that we use responsibly and carefully in our research. But they have these aspects as well, so they can speed up processes. They can help to get an idea to the reader or the public quicker than perhaps we could have done before. Yet at the same time, there is a huge risk that they could dilute and contaminate knowledge. Amazon had to restrict authors to self-publishing only 3 books a day. So what's that, 900 books a year that you're allowed to publish through Amazon, because people were generating books or using AI and just producing so many kind of garbage through AI and just flooding the Amazon system, which then contaminates knowledge, because when someone goes to Amazon, tries to find a book on a particular topic, they might find all these books that are generated by AI, right? Equally, we have a publisher here arguing that they are trying to disrupt publishing industry by using AI to publish 8,000 books in this year. So by the end of this year, that publisher planned to have 8,000 books. How will other kinds of publishers kind of keep up in a sense, or be seen when that much content is being produced? So this is kind of the counter of that. So we have this issue. And we're obviously seeing AI being integrated into our knowledge dissemination processes. As Liz mentioned, students are using it in their writing, and we're finding that academics are doing the same thing. So studies have been done by people like Andrew Gray, who looked at articles and looked for specific words that were coming up, and found certain words are being used more frequently after the advent of ChatGPT. And then introduced that was related to this development of AI. And then we've got very evident cases where AI speak has entered academic papers. These have been retracted papers, but languages from the AI models themselves have got all the way through from the author writing the paper, some type of peer review, obviously not very effective, editor, copy editor, which is probably AI these days, then to the general public, or then published on the journal website and then picked up by readers, right? So you can see how these things are getting through. These have been retracted, but I think they give evidence to show that that AI is widespreadly being used, right? Okay, this was another crazy example that was in an academic paper that's been retracted. There was an image of a rat with a giant penis that got a lot of attention because it was also in an academic paper. Okay. So part of this, so one suggestion early on was that AI perhaps could become author, that people would cite AI as an author, would actually accredit AI as author. So ChatGPT and me wrote this paper kind of thing. But this was obviously quickly shut down because AI is a tool. It is not responsible for what it does. The user is responsible for what it does. So if I use it in a certain way, I'm responsible for using it that way. So that wasn't the way we went forward. So the generators have the potential to exacerbate the crisis in confidence in academic publishing, as readers are unsure of whether what they're reading was written by humans, machines, or both. So then it creates this issue where we start to reduce even more the kind of trust in academic publishing, which is already struggling with a trust issue going forward. So as a response, we saw that there was this kind of advocation of the transparency principle. The people like COP, and most journals have adopted this, is that we need to say if we're using AI when we're engaged in publishing, when we're engaged in writing for academic articles or journals. So you'll see these from Taylor and Francis. There's another one here, I think it's from Elsevier. Most of the publishers have some kind of statement saying AI should be declared. So this is quite common. Universities have adopted the same thing. I don't know if Hong Kong U has, but Baptist did when I was there, and City U also has the same requirement. Yet there's non-compliance. I don't know how many of your students, or if you're students, or whether you feel comfortable declare, but also in journals, rarely are people declaring their use of AI. I've spoken to a number of journal editors now, and very few of them have found cases where people have declared, but they find that they themselves believe that AI is being used as part of the process. And anecdotally, talking to my colleagues, like Liz mentioned, colleagues saying, AI makes my writing better. They're using it as part of that process because they feel that that's something that's happening, that is making their writing better. But there's fears to this compliance, fear of academic repercussions. What will happen if I say that I've used AI? Ambiguous guidelines. What kinds of ways of using AI can I use? Okay, is proofreading okay? Is rewriting something okay? Is using it as part of the research process okay? Is using it to translate something okay? Is using it to transcribe something okay? What uses are okay? Because this is a very diverse tool, which is something we've never come across before in this domain, and we don't know how to deal with it. Inconsistent enforcement, as in like some people might get away with it, therefore I might get away with it too, kind of language. Peer influence, everyone's doing it, why shouldn't I? And that was something that came up when we're having discussions, when we're coming with guidance, that students were concerned that if my classmates are using it, but they're not declaring it, they're getting A's, I'm not getting an A, or this perception, then I'm going to use it because I want to get an A. And then fear of editors, reviewers, and potential readers will judge the authors unfairly. And generally, this is the case, that if people tend to think something's written by AI, they generally have a negative perception of it. So these people's fears are actually legitimate because we do have a negative perception of work that's generated by AI. We generally treat people who use AI as lazy, incompetent, or dishonest. And this is kind of one of the narratives that we see, and that feeds into how we might perceive how people use it as. Even people like Apple use these concepts to sell their products. So when you look at the ads for Apple Intelligence, basically it's people being lazy, people being incompetent, people being dishonest. I haven't prepared for my meeting. I'll get AI to summarize the notes and think I'm prepared, kind of thing. Okay. So what I argue is that this kind of creates a deception and breakdown of trust. The perceived risk of using AI and not declaring it is lower than the perceived risk of declaring the use of AI and being judged more harshly as a result. And it leads to this cat and mouse chase where journals are trying to find if people are using AI, instructors are trying to find if people are using AI, and people are trying to find ways to hide their use of AI. So it's creating this kind of culture of deception, culture of lack of trust, which creates risk of unfair treatment because we might catch some people and not others. It creates uncritical use of AI because we can't have open and honest discussions about it, because if we do, then we're declaring that we might be using it. And it has issues around erosion of institutional academic integrity because we don't know how to deal with cases when they come up, and what uses are okay and which are not. So we have these concepts like AI cheating coming out, which for me is kind of problematic because it creates this whole new genre, or a whole new idea that there is such a thing as this. So for me, with all the caveats that Liz and Professor Chu mentioned, which I fully agree with in every way, actually. But the challenge is because it exists, we have to think about how do we then live in a world where it does, is this idea that we need to normalize the idea. So we need to shift from seeing these tools as a sign of deficit to a sign of enhancement in some way, where we use them in ways that are more nuanced and more strategic. So it's not just asking them to rewrite an email, it's using them in a way that helps me to think about how better to construct something. So it's engaging in that dialogic process of working with AI, not just giving it to AI to do. So this is that. And when it's not useful, and I find AI horrific at email writing because it doesn't know my audience. So it tends to give you these very flowery emails like, dear esteemed colleague, and things like that to someone I know who's a friend of mine in the same department. It does all that kind of thing, which I find really frustrating. In those situations, I wouldn't use it. I'm thinking about that. So, and maintaining this human accountability. So it's the responsible, ethical use of AI that we need to focus on, bringing AI into that loop. And if we can be more transparent, then we can have more accountability, because people can be thinking about how do I use it and then declaring their use based on this idea that I'm accountable for that use. But if I do it as a deceptive way, that accountability drops because I'm denying that I did. And I'll take that denying to the grave kind of situation. Okay, so my argument, I know that time's coming up. So we need to develop new methods We must develop methodological models and frameworks that reflect how we can use AI ethically, legally, and transparently to support others' knowledge production activities. So what are the ways that can be used, and what are the ways that it can't be used, and where is the space in between, so we can actually think of that, how do we declare this in a more nuanced way, right? Creating models where Gen AI is used as part of the process, and protocols for writing about these processes can be drafted and then tested. So, in a paper I used it for, I used ChatGPT 4 as like a secondary coding. So I had some qualitative data, I did human coding on it, and I gave ChatGPT 4.0 the same data to see what it came up with. And in that way, I can then see if I'm missing any themes, missing any ideas, that kind of thing. And then I wrote that up in the article. That part of the article required a lot of clarification. The reviewers wanted me to make everything very clear about how I used it in a certain way with examples and things like this. But by doing that, I was able to then illustrate how it could enhance the process of data analysis. And then finally, as was also been mentioned, is this need for AI literacy development. So we need to be, if we're wanting to think about how AI is integrated into our knowledge production processes, we need to have more conversations about it, but we also need more development how it works, which is very useful for today's session. And also all these kind of issues around it. So when we're using it in a much more educated, thoughtful way. Okay. Finally, then, so if we can normalize AI, it allows us to understand the competency scholars need to use it, create space for open and honest discussions about it. We can kind of come out of the shadows, be more open, honest, and reflective about our use. In this way, trust in academic publishing can be regained. But I would hate to be the situation where AI is expected, and that would be my concern too. the peer reviewers say you haven't used AI, therefore you're not legitimate. I would be thinking. We do need to find a way to kind of have this conversation where it becomes normalized in the sense that this is something that is a tool that we use. Yeah. So thank you. If you're interested to read, I did write a short opinion piece about this for Times Higher Education that you can have a look at. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the three wonderful provocations given by the three speakers. So we used a little bit more time than we expected. So can we have 10 minutes comfort break? Because we have a lot of audiences here in this room. So we'll come back, I think at UK time, it will be 15 past 10. Is that okay, Rihanna?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, great. So see you in 10 minutes. Now this is the discussion part. And first of all, let me invite Professor Lai Chun, who is the head of the academic unit for language and literacy education at the Faculty of Education at the University of Hong Kong. Let me invite her to give some comments and raise questions on Ming's provocation.
Okay. Thank you, Mimi, for sharing the black box behind AI and to alert us on the potential bias of the knowledge generated by AI. While listening to your talk, I'm actually alerted because as a second language user of English, a lot of times when I write journal paper, especially when I'm not sure about a certain phrase or a certain way of expression, I would go to AI and to ask for alternative expression. Mm-hmm. But then in one of your slides, you talk about the bias in the database, right? It's many, it's based on old versus young. So that makes me feel alerting because it seems that I'm contributing to this many database through using AI to help me proof my text. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So that gives me the urge of avoiding using AI to some extent in order not to contribute to this bias. So what would be your comment? Because I also observed this with university students, like because the teachers were talking about the bias in the AI plagiarism. So some of the students basically said, I'm not using AI because I don't want to be biased. I don't want to be regarded as lazy or as a person who don't think. But the other argument is that AI do have contribution to the knowledge development of the field of the world, right?
Mhm.
So what would be your take on this? And
So I mentioned earlier that AI helps people win a Nobel Prize. So you don't want to miss out on Nobel Prize, right? On the other hand, there are things that are wrong with it. So this is true of almost any technology. You can any technology you can probably use well, you can use badly. So it's understanding what it does, what its flaws are. So in terms of language, if you think about Lizzie's examples, which I think were really precise, there's a place for following some of these basic instructions, like try to be short. There's a benefit to that. At the same time, there are times when you'll want to do that. And so I remember in a university class, we were doing chemistry. There's something called ideal gas law. In high school, we learned it's always true. And then in like the freshman year of college, we learned sometimes it's not true. And in graduate school, I learned actually it's never true, but it's a reasonable approximation. And so this is a point where at every single stage, it's reasonable. When you're just learning something, here's a rough sketch of what's going on, and that's good for helping you understand how gases work. And then as you get more sophisticated, you're like, okay, it's not totally true. There are things that are wrong with it. And then when you're really, really good, you can realize, okay, it's never true, but useful in certain ways. So I think this is a good way to think about AI or any tool. If you want to do basic things, let's say you don't know a language very well, that's probably a good time to ask generative AI to produce something for you, because if it's better than what you produce, you should probably use it, right? But then at some point you get better. In terms of writing, you can become a really good writer, realize okay, there are limitations there. And I'm not gonna use this anymore because I can do better. Right? So I think that's the way to think about it. And it's hard to tell exactly what stage you're at. So this is where you want to have different perspectives on things, right? You don't only want to consult AI. You also want to have your friend look at it, right? Have them see what's going on. And then if it makes a mistake I'm full instead of I'm not really hungry, then they let you know is that sure what you mean? That seems kind of odd. So this is where you want to triangulate, and you want to have input from different sources. You don't want to just rely on AI. So it's a useful tool, but don't just rely. You should be good enough so that you can do better than AI for a lot of things. In terms of writing, it's also about what instructions you give too. So just when you have an assistant, if you give your assistant instructions, they'll do a better job than you give it bad instructions. And so you think of AI as an assistant, it depends on how good your instructions are. And so the people won the Nobel Prize, they have really good instructions. So that's also a matter of how you use it, how you understand it.
so maybe that means when you do prompts, say, try to revise this, but don't look at too many, or don't look at so to counter the bias in the database.
Yeah, you can ask people very specific. So for instance, when you talk about emails, I can ask it, okay, make this more casual, more friendlier, or like the boss prompts. Actually, I think I would not do a lot of things as a boss because I already have a huge power imbalance over people. So actually, I use more of the weaker ones because I want them to feel more at ease. I want a relationship to be more equal. I would show more uncertainty, so it's easier for them to talk. So I think this is about you're developing understanding of how things work, and then you give better instructions.
And do you have another?
Yeah, go
And another thing I want to follow up in terms of the bias of database, as you said that the database, the knowledge is based on certain country, right? Especially English, right? Okay. So I'm thinking, is it possible, say, for example, when we talk with the university students in mainland China here, they actually show a certain level of criticality towards the AI's capacity, the knowledge AI generated. But then if the database was based on English and produced by certain country, though, would that mean that for those people, it's hard for them to get this kind of critical stance because it's basically reflecting, self-perpetuate their idea.
Yep.
So what do you think of this?
Yeah, that's definitely going to be a problem. So actually, ChatGPT has multiple language databases. So you can ask a question in English, ask a question in Chinese, and you get slightly different personalities. So English is pretty much open, it's dominated by English-speaking countries. Chinese, well, let me give a quick example first. So if you ask in English, you're more likely to get an extreme answer. like, one or the other. In Chinese, it's much more likely to be in the middle. And this reflects the cultural preference. Like Chinese people don't want to stand out so much. They tend to prefer things to be in the middle. And so there's like a centrality bias. And you can think of like individualist countries like US, they have an extremist bias. So there's like the data you used was going to affect like the answers. There's also the issue of censorship. So Chinese websites, there should be a lot more data in Chinese websites because there are a lot more people, but there isn't. That's because it's government censorship. They've like, so if you're a government censor, let's say a person responsible for this, you're not really sure what's really good or bad to keep. So you're going to always err inside like, let's remove it just in case. Like you're not going to be fired for like, someone missing data, but you will get fired if there's something sensitive that like makes someone look bad. So as a result of this, 75% of Chinese websites are just gone. So if you look at like the Chinese AI, generative AI, and like the Western ones, the Chinese ones are really terrible because they've lost so much data. And then the data still there are usually government approved ones. So there's also issues like where data comes from, the data source. You can see how this affects like their answers.
Yeah.
Did I answer your question?
Yeah, I think to some extent, I feel that it actually points to the problem of self-portraiting,
Yeah.
right? So, yeah.
Yes, because it's going to reproduce that. So
Yeah.
like if I'm asking AI to do something, and then that, then it becomes like part of paper, then that's part of the database, right? And even if you don't publish it, whatever you put in, it's going to keep on using. So like the problem I mentioned before, propagating errors, that's happening right now, regardless of whether you want it to do or not.
Okay, thank you. Now let's invite our second discussant, who is also our convener of Multilingual University Network, Dr. Ibra Bakhat, who is currently online. Ibra, hi.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we can hear you perfectly.
Oh, very good. Shall I start?
Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you to Legion for organizing this and leading it, and all our speakers. And thank you, Professor Jackson, for that very insightful and interesting provocation. And I was thinking as you were speaking, as all the speakers were speaking, what the implications are more for language and knowledge production. And I just had some thoughts. I just wrote them down, so they're just going to come out as I noted them. So those who are overly reliant on AI, let's, for the sake of argument, call them the artificially intelligent. You tend to see them on social media having a meltdown when ChatGPT doesn't work anymore. And I can't help but feel extremely concerned about what the future holds with more and more people adopting this kind of attitude. And then there's the other group who are not reliant on AI, and let's call them the authentically intelligent. I feel more confident with this group. Should technology not work, go awry, or the robot overlords take over, or just that it's just not sustainable in the way that you talk about. And the second group, I think, is the most important group for academics to be trained into, to be trained as, and for knowledge production to be truly fruitful and meaningful. We have to be authentically intelligent. We have to nurture authentic intelligence and not reliance on an aid, because you know what happens when you rely on an aid. Like if I don't use my left arm and I rely on an aid, eventually my left arm will atrophy and I won't be able to use it properly. And that connects to whose linguistic norms, I think, are being prioritized, which is what you mentioned. Because the second group, the authentically intelligent, they retain all their linguistic idiosyncrasies, their regional dialect, their voice. And I think that's a fundamental part of knowledge production. So let me share a recent example, which came to me as you were speaking, actually, just not long ago, literally a few days ago, this thing occurred through my editorial work for a journal. So I received an article which I thought was excellent, and it contained really high-level theory. And so I forwarded it to a reviewer, but one reviewer rejected it, saying that they didn't like the tone of the article. And the feedback focused on the tone and not on the content, when it was a very complex set of ideas, philosophical ideas being critiqued quite sharply. So I thought about this, and I realized that the English in the article reflected a kind of Indian English, a variation that is linguistically valid and can actually be very eloquent. And the piece was very eloquent. But there weren't any grammatical mistakes in it. It was just written in a particular way. And as you know, probably that English has been in the Indian subcontinent as long as English has been in America, probably longer, actually. Yet the latter are seen as native speakers, and people from the Indian subcontinent have to go through all those ridiculous hoops like IELTS and all of that. So I suspect that the reviewer wasn't comfortable with the style of Indian English and perhaps found it slightly abrasive. Or maybe they just didn't appreciate that high-level theory could be conveyed in that kind of language. And they expected high-level theory to be conveyed in a linguistic register that they are familiar with. So I then sent it to another reviewer, and that person liked it a lot. So the point here is that had the author, if my assumption is right about that paper, had they run their paper through ChatGPT or AI, it would have neutralized it. It would have removed the animated intricacies of Indian English, the human element, which identifies the writer. That would have gone. That would have been ironed out. That distinct human touch, warts and all, idiosyncrasies and all. Some of my favorite professors, they are not native speakers of English, and occasionally you see the idiosyncrasies. They miss a definite article or an indefinite article out occasionally or something. But that's really integral. I think it's part of the person, and it's not the first time this has happened in history. Those mistakes, for example, in the medieval period, Arabic was a lingua franca for knowledge production, with Persians and Turks and even Andalusians from Spain writing in Arabic, like Ibn Rushd, Ibn Sina and others. And if you know me, I have a beef with applied linguistics because it doesn't deal with the historicity. It just it consumes itself with the last 100 years of linguistics. But if you look at Avicenna's manuscripts, who was a Persian writing in Arabic but living in Central Asia, that you can actually access his manuscripts and you can see grammatical errors in them, in his actual Arabic manuscripts. And his textbooks were used for 600 years in institutions in Asia, Middle East, and even in Europe. And that's how we know that he wrote them, that they were written by him, because it situates him in his reality, a Persian philosopher living in Central Asia, writing in Arabic. And who knows, perhaps in the future, people might intentionally, not, well, I suppose, boast about the errors in their writing to prove that it's written by human beings and not by AI. It could become a way of highlighting the human element. But then again, you might get AI to do that for you. You might say, could you please put a typo on every other page to make it look like it wasn't written by AI? So I don't know. Maybe you could answer some of that. But I'll end with an anecdote which really sums up some of this. I was messing around with AI just to prepare for this, just to think about some ideas. And I asked AI, could you give me some points about interesting debates about AI and knowledge production in the multilingual university? And it said yes. And I got really excited. And then it said on the 17th of January on 2025, an event was held by the SRHE Multilingual University Network. So that kind of sums up AI. So I'll just sort of leave that to you, leave it to you. You can comment on.
Well, thank you so much. I mean, there's so much there, and I think you really articulate well this concern I have, and there's a lot of different parts of this concern about the nature of voice and how it has to do with a person and a perspective. I know, so you had the example with being a journal editor. So one thing I'm quite interested in is there's some research that shows that when it comes to gender, even in double-blind processes, we can tell who is a man or woman, we can tell who's a native English speaker and who isn't, and people have biases around these. And I have to confess that I am developing a prejudice, which students will probably be interested to know, especially. In your case, I was expecting you to say that that author was using AI, because I have a prejudice. If I see that, especially a student that I know and I talk to, and all of a sudden I read their paper and it's very direct and aggressive, I instantly develop a bias. This isn't their voice. And I get really confused because I know that I know that they're a nice person and they're not cheating, but I think how sad is this that they took away their voice? But I think that's a really great example too, that AI can take that away. And I think it also gets to, I mean, so I think it's really interesting to reflect on what's the best style of communicating. I try as a philosopher, I think clarity and transparency of communication is actually really important. But each culture has different levels of thinking what's a good way to argue or a bad way to argue, what's a good way to assert or bad. And I want to keep those nuances there. And I am very afraid that people who, as you mentioned, the issue of people who are not confident in English, that then their style becomes a bit over the top in general, you know, and what's lost if that style becomes too extreme, and it goes away from the nuance that they would have if they were communicating more confidently. So that's a concern. And I'm not sure I like the solution. Yes, so AI can work on these issues. I'm not sure what I think about AI working on these issues. I do think we can ask AI, you know, make this a B-level paper rather than an A-level paper. So my teacher isn't suspicious. I'm sure that's possible today. But yeah, I think there's a lot of interesting issues there and really important for, I think, journal editors and teachers and everyone should be thinking about what writing style is and why it's important. And, you know, is anonymity important? Is it important that you're talking universally to a universal group or not? I think the idea that we're universal people talking to other people in a universal way is extremely overrated. If we're talking about making education better in different parts of the world, it matters if I know something about Hong Kong. If I'm saying Hong Kong education needs blah, 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 it matters that I know about Hong Kong. It matters who I am. And that's part of where the authority comes from. And that's an authority that we don't want to, you know, kind of give up for some abstract ideal. So that's just kind of my response to what you said, but thanks so much for those comments. Really interesting.
Okay, thank you. So now let's invite our third discussant who is also online, Dr. Dylan Williams. Dylan.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much to all the speakers today for your very insightful presentations and also your valuable contributions as well, and also Jenny for you for organizing all of this. Ben, the first matter that I'd like to raise relates to points that you make about AI having the potential to dilute and contaminate knowledge. So in terms of the current models that we're working with, from a multilingual perspective, a point we need to consider is how do we deal with matters that get lost in translation, where human accountability can take a more nuanced approach and preserve an intercultural ethic. Do you have any comments on that at all?
Yeah, I mean, I've been thinking about this a lot because I think let me see if I can articulate it correctly. But basically, like when we're thinking about translation or changing meaning from one language to another, there is a lot of cultural and language specific things that will inevitably get lost when we use tools to do that process. I mean, I think that's known. Yet the access to good quality, professional, contextually sensitive translation is limited around the world. People don't have access to that most of the time. Professionals that can do that kind of very niche and very specific kind of translation. So for the majority of people, they don't have access to that. So AI gives access to what I would say is good enough for a lot of situations. So when you don't have access to someone that can help you to do that, you don't need it to be at that level of nuance, but you need something so you can engage with a specific task at a specific time that AI can do that, but with that recognition that something is lost. So what I argue is that, and that's why I argue for this transparency, because I think at the moment people are using it without saying they're using it. So people assume it's been translated by a human, but it hasn't. People assume lots of things are being done by humans, but they're not. And that's where our issue is. So in a paper I wrote about teachers using AI for translation, which I think is something they can do because they might have a multilingual classroom and multilingual speakers. They don't speak all those languages of their students. They may not speak all the languages of the parents, but they want to find a way to communicate with those parents in those environments. If they just use ChatGPT to translate, for example, and then send that home without saying, I used AI to do this, the parents will interpret that as being translated by a human and then get, why are they not culturally sensitive to me? Why are they not aware of my situation? But if they label it as such, is I use ChatGPT to do this, sorry for any like insensitivity or misunderstandings that you may get from this, then they will interpret it differently. And so I think it's down to that kind of how we make that transparent in the process, because now I think the tech companies, the media are kind of pushing the narrative of this will make your life easier. You can deceive others that you can do things that you can't using these tools. I think there's where the issue is. But if you say I've used it, then people will look at it differently. That's my thinking. So it can open up opportunities to people who don't have access to those kinds of translation, those people who can do that kind of translation.
Okay, thank you. So yeah, Dylan, keep going.
Thank you so much for your response. Yeah, I was just kind of thinking as you were giving your response that maybe, you know, it's a case of not necessarily allowing AI to let things get lost in translation. In other words, what we could do is we could allow knowledge structures connected to other languages to come in to the translation process, rather than allowing AI to translate them in a sort of inaccurate way. But also, I'd like to raise another point that you raised in your presentation, also about where does AI leave the value of language? For instance, for a second language learner learning a language through AI, they would bypass opportunities to think critically about sentence structure and meaning, which can result in a sort of passive learning process where a learner doesn't fully internalize the language. So connected to this, we need to think about what does this mean for language in education? Does it need to be revitalized in some way to counter against the threat of AI? And also, ultimately, what does this mean for the future of language programs in higher education? So I was wondering if you had any comments about that.
Yeah, legitimate and important things to talk about, quite large topic areas to explore. Yeah, I mean, I think that, I mean, what I've been advocating for is that in Hong Kong and other places, we have a very transactional view toward learning. Not the people in this room, they wouldn't be here, but a lot of people see learning as the goal of getting the grade. So the ways to get that grade faster and more efficiently will prioritize the learning from the process, and that comes into language education as well. It's not that my goal is to get the grade for that course, rather than what do I learn from that course. So I think the kind of like the argument for self-improvement, how learning helps become better people, needs to be better emphasized in our courses and our programs, and in wider society as well. You know, this kind of neoliberal view of education is kind of affecting every aspect of the curriculum. And I think that's something that AI, coming into that kind of neoliberal environment, AI is very detrimental to those things, because students will say, well, I don't care really about the learning, I care about the product. So I think that needs to be better discussed. We need to think more about how we do that. And then that kind of nuanced use of AI, right? Because AI can do it for you, but you can also use it as a tool to try and help you to do it. So I think trying to help them to see those differences, and also when not to use AI. I've been having those conversations with my students as well. You know, I've told them, you know, if they are using AI to support their writing, that they turn it on as a feature, and they're the ones that reject or select what it suggests. They don't just say, please rewrite this for me. So at least they're cognitively involved in making decisions. So if they do select what AI suggests to them, they're doing that cognitively rather than uncognitively. So those are the things I think that we can, that's the kind of micro level. The more macro level is how do we make the self-improvement the goal of learning rather than the grade. So I think within that spectrum, we have to find things all the way across. That makes sense. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dylan and Ben. That's a very interesting discussion. So now we have some minutes for the audience to raise questions. And so the audience in this room and also the audience online, you're welcome to raise questions. So I've already noticed there's a bunch of questions raised by online audiences. So maybe Ibra, you could read some questions raised by the online audience.
Actually, there's one point from me there, actually, but I won't get to that first. There's another one here that I've just seen from He Zhao, who says, "I'm working on the English language teacher with ChatGPT. I'm wondering what I can do to make my product have more human qualities." Could you just clarify what you does that mean you're learning with ChatGPT as the teacher? I'm not really sure what that means. But how could they interact with it so that it has more human qualities, I think is the question there. Any questions or any potential answer to that?
Hello, can you hear me?
Oh yes. All right, yeah, there you are. Yes, we can hear you.
Thank you. So my question is actually based on, because I am very new with or to ChatGPT, and I'm learning how to do prompt engineering, and I don't seem to find my way to train the right GPT model, and so I think I hit a barrier here to actually to make the product make sense. So hence the question.
So perhaps I can say something about that. This kind of idea that large language models are more machine-like, but the data comes from humans. And so you're not going to get things that are more mechanical or colder. You can get what most people write about. So Liz mentioned, Professor Jackson mentioned, a question of like, why is it that there's a lot of abstract stuff and why is it like really power dominated? And that's because that's what a lot of data is. A lot of it is by politicians. A lot of it is like government documents or legal documents or business documents. They tend to be written by men. They tend to be about trying to tell people what to do, persuade people this is the right thing to do. And they tend to be less concrete because they're trying to have a sense that this is always true. Right? So you use abstract language to try to go for universal. If you go for a specific thing, people are going to like, hey, that's only that specific situation. So that's really about power and persuasion. So the data we get is from humans. It's not like generated by a computer. It comes from human beings. And the problem isn't that it's computer generated. The problem is that most of the data is written by certain types of humans.
Interesting.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you.
There's do you want to do it alternate, Legion, like one from in the room and one online, or do you want to just carry on?
Are there any questions in this room? Yeah.
This is Roman. As I was thinking about researchers' use of generative AI, because Professor Chu has just mentioned, it is a collective generalized response from ChatGPT or other tools. Then if I am a language researcher, I want to research certain language aspects and take into account of a certain public. Let's say I want to analyze native British English speakers' use of stress in certain verbs. Then could I possibly use AI voices and then generate a review from that and then say, oh, this is a general phenomenon from British English speakers? Would that be possible?
Yeah, this is actually something that I'm not sure a lot of people know about. ChatGPT or any large language model, they have giant databases. But you can actually target which part of the database you want to use. So in your example, you could tell ChatGPT, you are like a British speaker from like 1873, and you have these particular aspects. Do this, right? So to give a more research example, I'm trying to figure out like, how can I tell whether something is true or fake news? And so if I wanted to like look at linguistic properties, I'll tell ChatGPT, you are a linguist, and then like analyze this aspect of it. And it'll try to access databases where it has the word linguist appears. Those are probably databases that are more linguistically oriented, that have that type of knowledge. And that will probably be more accurate for what I want to do. So you can actually tell ChatGPT or any large language model what type of information you want by telling it what role you want to take up. You can also tell it to be like a 6-year-old child, right? So, or in your case, you're looking at like people learning language through music. You can tell it to be, you're a pianist, but then tell it you're now a non-pianist, and they'll give you different answers.
Thank you.
Thank you. So are there any comments or questions online?
I had a comment, or well, it was just a question from in relation to the comment that was made about publishing. So there's evidence of there's a lot more retractions now than there ever have been in the history of publishing. There's a lot more people writing, and there's a lot more retractions, and the retractions are from all over the world. And there are some cases where papers have been edited. Let's say that the AI prompt has found its way into the article. I'm sure you've seen those examples. I think Ben mentioned them as well. And there are some cases where there's not been a retraction that's issued. Instead, the paper has just been edited. And the ChatGPT prompt's been taken out, which is not really the right thing to do. A publisher should really retract the entire article, because if they don't, then it's possible that two people will have two different versions of the same article, which cannot happen for science at all. And so I don't think publishers have really grasped what to do. I don't think they really know what's going on. I think they are also sort of figuring it out as they're going along. And I just wanted to know if any of the panel have any insight on that or any comment on that from the publishing world.
Thank you.
We've had, so the journal that I'm the editor for, we've had kind of evolving advice about the use of AI in our publications. But it's quite interesting because they don't, so it's Taylor and Francis Routledge. So they don't really want people to use AI unless they cite it, of course, or it counts as plagiarism. But then they also are using all of the data that's published to train AI. So it's very controversial. We're definitely supposed to check it and forbid it. One interesting thing they said, and they said this a year ago, and I'm wondering if they would still have the same advice now. They said, if you think of papers with AI, don't review it and say what's wrong with it. Don't tell them you think it's AI, because the person who's submitting that paper will just make a better paper with AI based on the reviewer feedback. We don't want human reviewers to review papers written by AI to improve their quality as such. I thought that was really interesting, but it goes back to the comment you made earlier. What if I'm wrong in my judgment? What if I'm wrong with my students or with a paper? And I think it's been written by AI, and it hasn't. I can say the papers I know that have been, that have used AI that we figured out one way or another, they just weren't good papers. So that's part of my lack of confidence. It's just like, well, John Dewey really cares about environmental education and sustainable development. It's like, no, John Dewey doesn't. What are you talking about? So it's usually very obvious because AI is not that good at philosophy yet. But yeah, I don't know if other people have anything but smart to say.
Onto that though, I mean, I think that's been something I've been trying to talk about at the university as well, because usually the quality is an issue. So we get obsessed with the AI point. But I have colleagues coming to me and say, oh, this student's used AI. Is the paper any good? No. I said, well, then that's the issue. Don't worry about the AI. Worry about the paper, because the student will learn from the feedback, the fact that they didn't get a good grade, and they will respond to that, not to the use of AI. If you go in there and say, I think you used AI, they'll become defensive and concerned that you're affecting their integrity. But if the quality is not there, they'll either learn to use AI better, or they'll think about, okay, what do I need to improve myself, or do I need to do it myself? I think that's probably part of it as well, I think. Yeah, I think that key is kind of like focus on what you get, the quality of what you get, partly.
So, like, yeah, I want to talk about 2 points: quality and detection. So, it's not that good now, but it's gotten so much better in just 2 years. So it will almost certainly get better next year and this year. So in fact, it's gotten to a point where they need to design new tests for like the cutting edge AI because they're too good. Like the tests they're basically everyone's passing tests. So AI is getting really amazingly good. So maybe like last year, the quality was pretty terrible, but I'm pretty sure next year, AI can generate pretty good papers. So quality is a problem now, but it's not very good now, but I think that's not going to be the issue in the future. And so I think in the future, we cannot have assignments that AI can mimic. Like if you ask people to write essays now, that's fine. But I think in the future, you cannot ask students to write essays anymore because you just won't be able to tell. And in terms of detection, I was talking to the CEO of a company who tries to detect whether it's AI or not. So he's very proud of himself. He's like, if we tell AI to write a paper, I can tell 80% of the time it's written by AI. It's like, well, 80% is pretty good, for research. But like, if you think about like the law, 20% failure is pretty terrible, right? If you accuse someone of cheating, you're wrong 20% of the time, you're going to be sued so many times you're going to go bankrupt. So a 20% failure rate is not acceptable, and it's not clear it can get any better. So here's something that you can do pretty easily to basically not get caught. Let's say you have to write a paper on the effect of World War II on Chinese economy. You can just ask it to write that. But if you give it like a little bit of like your own writing and ask it to write in your style, it's basically impossible for the AI to figure out if anyone detect whether it's your writing, right? Because it's actually trying to mimic your writing. So in the near future, we're not going to have assignments like simple essays anymore. It has to be something that's different. And I think this is true for a lot of things. Like AI is going to change the world. We don't know what's going to happen, how it's going to get changed. But you can see with the Nobel Prize, they took a technology and they didn't ask it to write a paper. It asked it to like do a really specific thing. They had scientists working on it. And so they decided like this is a good use of AI. And I think this is what's going to happen in the future. So one of my friends like is teaching, and she's like, okay, how can I use AI to make it better? And so at the time, there was like a whole thing about people ask AI to write Taylor Swift songs. So she took her lecture and asked AI to turn it into a song. And then so she went to class, she sang her lecture. And so this might be a new standard, like you can't lecture anymore, you have to sing in your classes, and that's what you need to be a good teacher. So I think this is like the type of thing where it's changing very rapidly. We're just thinking about how AI can do what we're doing now. We're missing a lot of potential.
Okay, so
There's a couple of other points.
Yeah.
Sorry.
yeah, go ahead, Gabriel. Yeah.
There's a couple of other points in the chat. Michael Byram says the significance of education from primary onwards has been rightly emphasized. There is a basis for a curriculum for higher education students. We need the same thing for primary and secondary. And that's just a comment there, echoing some of the points that you've already raised. And there's Sin Yi Chang says that thank you to all the speakers and organizers for a very thought-provoking discussion session. I was looking at the title of the panel again and wondering whether or to what extent do the speakers and discussants think that the fast development of AI will make higher education more multilingual?
I can answer that. Yeah. Actually, it's not just higher education. I think the entire world will be more multilingual. Because if you have an amazing translation service, which Google Translate is supposed to develop, lots of products that were like only available in Italian are now available to almost everyone. So like a simple thing is like, I like traveling, I go around the world. I used to have to like, find people or friends who could translate. Now I can just like take out my phone and I put it down, I start talking to people, and it'll translate pretty well. And so you think about all the products that were in one language now could be any language. You think about teaching. I mean, it's not there yet, but if you can get to a point where it's real-time translation, you could just teach people in different languages. So I think it's not just like higher ed. I think the entire world is going to have massive competition because now you need to be the best product in the world now, pretty much. You can't just be a best product in your own country.
Yeah, I mean, we could have a multilingual panel, and each person on the panel would not be able to speak the other person's language, and AI could provide real-time translation. That'd be phenomenal. I would love to speak to some thinkers in China and in Arabia about ideas. And at the moment, I've got to either brush up on my own language skills, which takes decades to do, or I've got to rely on them being multilingual, which is not really fair on them. So there are opportunities in this respect, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Okay, we're about to reach the time, so I'd like to thank everyone who participated in today's event, and thank you for all the very inspiring and engaging discussions. I think the dialogue today between AI generated and human generated multilingualism reveals a lot of differences in terms of understanding, in terms of creativity, emotion, individuality, gender, religion, or ethnicity. So while AI offers remarkable advances in language processing, and I get from other speakers today, it is also very essential to recognize the irreplaceable value of human generated languages. So I don't think we have reached a solution or conclusion yet based on this topic, but I hope today's event could open a continued dialogue on the relationship between AI and human beings. And I hope we could have more interesting topics related on in this area in our future events. Okay, thank you very much for participation today, and I wish you a very nice weekend. So thank you and goodbye. Goodbye.
Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.